The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the sterile corporate conference room as Margaret Chen sat quietly in the corner, her fingers dancing across her laptop keyboard. To everyone else in that room, she was invisible, just another secretary, taking notes while the important people talked. The executives in their expensive suits barely acknowledged her presence, discussing quarterly reports and strategic initiatives as if she were part of the furniture. Little did they know that in just a few hours, this unassuming woman would deliver a performance so extraordinary, so utterly perfect, that it would become the stuff of legend. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Margaret had worked at Morrison Associates for 8 years. And in all that time, she'd never once raised her voice in a meeting. She arrived early, left late, and handled every task with quiet efficiency. Her colleagues saw her as reliable, but unremarkable, the kind of person who kept the office running smoothly while others climbed the corporate ladder. What they didn't see were the calluses on her fingertips, the steady hands that never trembled under pressure, or the laser-focused concentration that lay beneath her humble exterior. The company's annual retreat was scheduled for the following weekend at Pine Ridge Lodge, a rustic mountain resort that prided itself on team-building activities. This year's theme was Hidden Talents, and the Human Resources Department had organized various competitions designed to reveal unexpected skills among the staff. There would be cooking contests, trivia challenges, and yes, a shooting competition. At the lodge's professional-grade firing range, when the memo about the shooting competition first circulated, the reaction was predictably divided along gender and hierarchy lines. The male executives immediately began boasting about their hunting experiences and military backgrounds. James Morrison III, the company's arrogant vice president and son of the founder, loudly proclaimed that he'd been shooting since he was 12 and had even placed third in his college's marksmanship club. His cronies nodded appreciatively, already planning their strategy for what they assumed would be an easy victory. "What about you, Margaret?" asked Sandra from accounting, more out of politeness than genuine interest. "Are you going to try the shooting competition?" Margaret looked up from her computer screen, her dark eyes betraying nothing of the thoughts racing through her mind. "I might give it a try," she said simply, her voice so soft that several people had to lean in to hear her. The response was immediate and predictable. James Morrison III let out a condescending chuckle that echoed through the break room. "That's sweet, Margaret, but shooting isn't really a secretary kind of activity. It requires steady nerves and precision. Maybe you'd be better suited for the baking contest." His comment drew nervous laughter from some of the younger employees, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes, a brief flash of steel that anyone paying attention might have recognized as dangerous. "We'll see," was all she said, returning to her work as if the conversation had never happened. What James Morrison III and the rest of her colleagues didn't know was that Margaret Chen had a secret. Every weekend for the past 5 years, she had driven 2 hours to a private shooting range in the mountains, where she trained under the guidance of Elena Vasquez, a former Olympic markswoman who had represented Spain in 3 consecutive Summer Games. What had started as a way to cope with the stress of her demanding job had evolved into something much more profound, a passion that consumed her free time and gave her a sense of purpose that her office work never could. Elena had recognized Margaret's natural talent from their very first session. "You have the gift," she had told her student after watching Margaret consistently hit targets that seasoned shooters struggled with. "Your breathing is perfect, your stance is textbook, and most importantly, you have the mental discipline. This isn't just about pulling a trigger. It's about becoming one with the weapon, understanding the physics of the shot, and maintaining absolute focus under pressure." Under Elena's tutelage, Margaret had progressed from a nervous beginner to a marksman of exceptional skill. She could hit a quarter-sized target from 50 yards with boring consistency. Her personal best was a perfect score at the range's most challenging precision Corsa, feat that had earned her quiet respect among the regular shooters who frequented the facility. But Margaret had never told anyone at work about her weekend activities. In her mind, her shooting was a private sanctuary, separate from the mundane world of corporate politics and petty hierarchies. The week leading up to the company retreat was filled with the usual office gossip and speculation. James Morrison III had brought in photos of his gun collection, regaling anyone who would listen with stories of his hunting exploits. Other male employees shared their own shooting experiences, creating an atmosphere of masculine bravado that seemed to exclude anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of what a marksman should look like. Margaret listened to these conversations with quiet amusement, continuing to perform her secretarial duties with the same unassuming professionalism that had defined her career. She scheduled meetings, typed reports, and answered phones, all while internally preparing for what she knew would be the most significant moment of her professional life. She had no illusions about what would happen if she performed well in the competition. She would prove a point that needed proving, not just for herself, but for every underestimated person who had ever been dismissed because of their job title or quiet demeanor. The morning of the company retreat arrived with a crisp mountain breeze and crystal-clear skies. Pine Ridge Lodge sat nestled among towering evergreens, its rustic charm providing the perfect backdrop for what would become one of the most talked-about corporate events in Morrison Associates history. As employees gathered in the main hall for breakfast, the anticipation was palpable. Various activity stations had been set up throughout the lodge grounds, but everyone's attention seemed focused on the professional shooting range, visible through the large picture windows. Margaret arrived precisely on time, carrying a small, black duffel bag that drew curious glances from her colleagues. She had dressed practically in dark jeans, a simple black sweater, and comfortable hiking boots, a stark contrast to some of her co-workers who seemed more concerned with looking the part than performing well. Her calm demeanor stood in sharp contrast to the nervous energy buzzing through the room as employees discussed their strategies for the various competitions. "Looking forward to trying something new today, Margaret?" asked Patricia from marketing, her tone carrying just enough condescension to make her true feelings clear. Patricia was one of James Morrison III's most vocal supporters, and she had made no secret of her belief that the shooting competition would be dominated by the more experienced members of the team. Margaret smiled politely and nodded. "I think it should be interesting," she replied, her voice maintaining its characteristic softness, even as her eyes held a quiet confidence that would have surprised anyone who bothered to really look. The morning activities began with team building, exercises, and a catered brunch, but everyone's attention kept drifting toward the afternoon's main event. James Morrison III held court at one of the larger tables, demonstrating his grip technique using a butter knife as a prop while his audience nodded appreciatively. His confidence bordered on arrogance as he described the various firearms he owned and the hunting trips he'd taken with clients and colleagues. "The key to good shooting," he proclaimed loudly enough for the entire dining room to hear, "is understanding that it's a man's sport. It requires upper body strength, steady nerves, and the kind of competitive instinct that you just can't teach. Some people have it, and others ... He let the sentence hang in the air while glancing meaningfully around the room at his female colleagues. Margaret continued eating her salad in silence, but Elena Vasquez's words echoed in her mind. "Never let them see you coming." The element of surprise is a marksman's greatest weapon. Her former Olympic coach had taught her more than just shooting technique. She had taught her about the psychology of competition, the importance of mental preparation, and the power of quiet confidence over loud boasting. As the afternoon approached, the excitement reached fever pitch. The lodge's shooting instructor, a grizzled former Marine named Bob Hendricks, gathered the participants at the range to explain the rules and safety procedures. The competition would consist of 3 rounds: precision shooting at fixed targets, timed rapid-fire sequences, and a final challenge round that would test both accuracy and composure. Under pressure, 23 employees had signed up for the competition, with the field dominated by men who seemed convinced that their gender gave them an inherent advantage. Margaret was one of only 4 women participating, and she was the only one who most of her colleagues considered a genuine outsider. The other 3 women, Patricia from marketing, Jennifer from sales, and Amy from legal, all had some connection to hunting or recreational shooting through family members or boyfriends. "All right, people," Bob Hendricks called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades training soldiers and civilians alike. "Before we begin, I want to make something crystal clear. This isn't about who talks the biggest game or who owns the most expensive equipment. Shooting is about discipline, respect for the weapon, and mental focus. I've seen weekend warriors who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, and I've seen complete beginners achieve remarkable accuracy on their first try. The target doesn't care about your resume or your gender, it only cares about whether you can put the bullet where it needs to go." The first round began with precision shooting at 50-yard targets. Each participant would fire 5 shots, with scoring based on proximity to the bullseye. James Morrison III, drawing the first position, stepped up to the firing line with obvious confidence. His stance was textbook, his grip firm, and his first shot landed solidly in the 8-ringer, respectable showing that drew appreciative murmurs from his supporters. His remaining 4 shots were consistent, if not spectacular, earning him a total score of 39 out of a possible 50 points. It was a solid performance that put him in early contention for the top spot. The other male participants followed with varying degrees of success, some matching James's performance, while others struggled with accuracy and consistency. When Margaret's turn came, she stepped up to the firing line with the same quiet composure she brought to every aspect of her work. The range fell unusually silent as she assumed her stance, and several of her colleagues exchanged knowing glances, already preparing their consolation comments for what they assumed would be an embarrassing performance. Margaret took her time, checking her grip and sight alignment with the methodical precision Elena had drilled into her during countless practice sessions. She controlled her breathing, finding that perfect moment between inhale and exhale where the body naturally steadies. The world around her faded away, the whispered conversations, the rustle of wind through the trees, even the distant sound of other activities at the lodge, until there was nothing but her, the weapon, and the target 50 yards away, her first shot rang out crisp and clean, the sound echoing off the surrounding mountains. Through the spotting scope, Bob Hendricks could see the hole appear dead center in the bullseye, a perfect 10 that drew a surprised grunt of approval from the experienced instructor. "Nice shot," he called out, loud enough for the other participants to hear. The casual conversations that had been buzzing around the range suddenly died down as people began to pay attention to the quiet secretary, who was apparently not quite what she seemed. Margaret's second shot followed, immediately after she had re-established her sight picture and controlled her breathing. The discipline Elena had instilled in her during 5 years of intensive training was evident in every movement, the slight adjustment of her stance, the precise alignment of the sights, and the smooth trigger pull that sent another bullet exactly where she intended it to go. Another perfect 10. The silence that had begun to settle over the range deepened into something approaching stunned disbelief. Bob Hendricks raised his binoculars to double-check what his spotting scope was telling him, while the gathered employees began to murmur among themselves. James Morrison, I's confident smile flickered for just a moment as he strained to see the target that was too far away for the naked eye to assess accurately. "What's her score so far?" Patricia from marketing asked nervously, her voice carrying a note of anxiety that hadn't been there when the competition began. 2 perfect 10s. Bob announced matter-of-factly, though his tone carried a hint of professional admiration. In his 20 years of running corporate shooting events, he had rarely seen such immediate precision from someone who was supposedly a beginner. Margaret's third shot continued the pattern. Her form remained absolutely consistent, feet planted, shoulder width apart, dominant eye aligned perfectly with the rear sight, her breathing controlled and rhythmic. The mental discipline that allowed her to remain calm during high-pressure board meetings served her well here, keeping her focused despite the growing attention from her colleagues. 10. The fourth shot landed with the same mechanical precision, prompting Bob Hendricks to lower his binoculars and look at Margaret with new respect. 4 for 4, he announced, and this time there was no mistaking the admiration in his voice. That's some impressive shooting. By now, the entire range had gone completely silent, except for the sound of wind through the pine trees. Even the employees participating in other activities had begun to drift over, drawn by the unusual quiet and the growing crowd of onlookers. James Morrison III stood with his arms crossed, his earlier confidence replaced by a growing unease that he tried unsuccessfully to hide behind a mask of casual indifference. Margaret prepared for her fifth and final shot of the precision round. She had trained for moments exactly like this, when the pressure mounted, when people were watching, when everything depended on maintaining absolute focus despite the distractions. Elena had put her through countless scenarios designed to test her mental toughness, from shooting while other people deliberately tried to distract her to competing under time pressure that would rattle most recreational shooters. The fifth shot was perfection itself. Margaret squeezed the trigger with the same smooth, consistent pressure she had applied to the previous 4 shots, and the bullet found its mark with mathematical precision. Another 10, giving her a perfect score of 50 points, a feat that Bob Hendricks had witnessed fewer than a dozen times in his extensive career. Perfect score, he announced, his voice carrying across the now silent range. 50 out of 50. Outstanding marksmanship. The reaction was immediate and polarized. Some of Margaret's colleagues burst into spontaneous applause, genuinely impressed by the display of skill they had just witnessed. Others, particularly those in James Morrison III's inner circle, seemed stunned into silence, unable to process what they had just seen. The quiet secretary who typed their memos and scheduled their meetings had just delivered a shooting performance that would be difficult for even experienced marksmen to match. Margaret stepped back from the firing line with the same composed demeanor she maintained in every aspect of her professional life. She nodded politely to Bob Hendricks, accepted the scattered congratulations from her colleagues, and quietly moved to the side to watch the remaining participants complete their rounds. But inside, she felt a surge of satisfaction unlike anything she had experienced in her corporate career. For once, her competence couldn't be dismissed or attributed to someone else's guidance. The remaining participants in the precision round struggled to match the standard Margaret had set. Even the most confident shooters seemed rattled by what they had witnessed, and their performances reflected the psychological pressure of following such an exceptional display. Jennifer from sales managed a respectable 42 points, while Amy from legal scored 38. The male participants fared no better, with only 2 managing to break 40 points and several falling well short of their own expectations. James Morrison III found himself in the uncomfortable position of having his solid 39-point performance completely overshadowed by someone he had dismissed as incapable just hours earlier. His hunting stories and equipment discussions suddenly seemed hollow and boastful in the face of Margaret's quiet competence. The congratulations he had expected to receive were instead directed toward the unassuming secretary, who had just redefined everyone's understanding of what she was capable of. As the group prepared for the second round-timed rapid-fire sequences, the Dynamic at the range had fundamentally shifted. Margaret was no longer invisible, no longer the quiet note-taker who could be safely ignored. She had become the standard against which everyone else would be measured, and the weight of that attention brought with it both respect and resentment from different quarters of her colleague base. "Bob," Hendricks approached Margaret during the brief break between rounds. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he asked directly, his experienced eye recognizing skills that went far beyond natural talent or beginner's luck. Margaret's response was characteristically modest. "I practice on weekends," she said simply, offering no details about Elena Vasquez, the years of intensive training, or the passion that had driven her to pursue excellence in an arena completely separate from her professional life, the range. Master nodded knowingly. In his experience, that kind of precision didn't happen by accident. It was the result of dedicated practice, professional instruction, and a level of commitment that most recreational shooters never achieved. Whatever Margaret's background, she was clearly operating at a different level than anyone else in this corporate competition. The second round was about to begin, and everyone present sensed that they were witnessing something special, a moment when assumptions would be shattered and reputations would be redefined by the simple act of putting bullets exactly where they needed to go. The second round of competition introduced an entirely different challenge that would separate the truly skilled marksmen from those who had merely gotten lucky with careful, deliberate shooting. The rapid-fire sequence required participants to engage 5 targets in succession within a strict 30-second time limit, testing not only accuracy but also speed, target acquisition, and the ability to maintain precision under time pressure. Bob Hendricks explained the rules with military precision. You'll have 30 seconds to engage all 5 targets from left to right, then right to left. Each target must be hit at least once, but you'll be scored on accuracy, not just hits. You can fire up to 15 rounds total, but remember, speed without accuracy is worthless, and accuracy without reasonable speed won't get you through all 5 targets. The challenge was designed to simulate real-world shooting scenarios where perfect conditions and unlimited time were luxuries that didn't exist. It would require participants to balance the competing demands of speed and precision, while managing the stress of a ticking clock and the pressure of performing in front of their colleagues. James Morrison III volunteered to go first again, clearly hoping to re-establish his dominance after Margaret's stunning performance in the precision round. He approached the firing line with renewed determination, having convinced himself that the rapid-fire sequence would favor his hunting experience and familiarity with quick target acquisition. "Time starts when you fire your first shot," Bob announced, raising his stopwatch. "Ready when you are." James assumed his stance and began engaging the targets with aggressive confidence. His shots came in rapid succession, crack, 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 as he worked through the sequence. His form was decent, and his speed was impressive, but under the pressure of the time limit, his accuracy began to suffer. Several shots missed their intended targets entirely, while others landed in the outer rings rather than the high-scoring center zones. When the 30 seconds elapsed, James had managed to hit all 5 targets, but with inconsistent accuracy. His total score of 32 points was respectable for the challenging rapid-fire format, but it lacked the precision that characterized truly exceptional marksmanship. He stepped back from the line, breathing heavily, adrenaline still coursing through his system from the intensity of the timed sequence. The other male participants followed with mixed results. Some struggled with the time pressure and failed to engage all 5 targets within the 30-second limit, while others sacrificed accuracy for speed and ended up with disappointing scores despite hitting their marks. The rapid-fire format was proving to be a great equalizer, exposing the difference between casual weekend shooting and the kind of disciplined training that produced consistent results under pressure. When Margaret's turn arrived, she stepped up to the firing line with the same quiet composure that had characterized her precision shooting. But those who had been watching her closely could see subtle differences in her preparation. Her stance was slightly more dynamic, her grip adjusted for quicker target transitions, and her breathing pattern had shifted to accommodate the faster pace of the rapid-fire sequence. Elena Vasquez had spent countless hours training Margaret for exactly this type of scenario. Rapid fire isn't about shooting faster, she had explained during one of their weekend sessions. It's about shooting efficiently. Every movement must be purposeful, every shot must count, and your mind must process targets and solutions faster than your finger can pull the trigger. "Ready," Margaret said simply, her voice steady and controlled. The timer started with her first shot, and immediately it became clear that Margaret's approach to rapid fire was fundamentally different from what the other participants had demonstrated. Rather than rushing through the sequence, she moved with fluid precision, her transitions between targets smooth and deliberate. Each shot was fired with the same careful sight alignment she had displayed during the precision round, but executed with a speed that spoke to countless hours of practice. Her first 5 shots, one to each target from left to right, landed with mechanical consistency in the high-scoring rings. Without pause, she reversed direction and began working back through the targets from right to left, her movement and breathing controlled despite the time pressure. The range had once again fallen silent except for the rhythmic crack of her shots and the metallic ting of bullets striking the target frames. Margaret completed the 10-shot sequence with time to spare, then made a decision that demonstrated both her skill and her tactical thinking. Rather than firing additional shots just to use up her allotted ammunition, she lowered her weapon and stepped back from the line with 8 seconds still remaining on the timer. "Time," Bob called out, though it was unnecessary since Margaret had clearly finished her sequence through his spotting scope. Bob could see that Margaret had achieved something remarkable. All 10 of her shots had landed in the 8 ring or better, with 6 of them clustered in the coveted 10 ring. Her total score of 94 points out of a possible 100 was not just the highest of the day. It was the highest score Bob had recorded in a corporate rapid-fire competition in over a decade. "Outstanding," he announced, genuine admiration evident in his voice. 94 points with 6 10s and 4 9s. That's professional-level shooting. The reaction from Margaret's colleagues was more muted this time, as the reality of what they were witnessing began to sink in. This wasn't beginner's luck or a single moment of unexpected competence. Margaret was demonstrating a level of skill that clearly came from serious training and dedicated practice. The quiet secretary who had been dismissed as incapable was proving to be a marksman of exceptional ability. James Morrison III stood with his arms crossed, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and the beginning stages of anger. His confident prediction of victory was crumbling in the face of Margaret's consistent excellence, and the psychological impact was starting to affect his ability to process what he was seeing. Patricia from marketing whispered to Jennifer from sales, "Where the hell did she learn to shoot like that?" The question hung in the air unanswered, as Margaret maintained her characteristic discretion about her weekend activities and her relationship with Elena Vasquez. As the remaining participants completed their rapid-fire sequences, it became increasingly clear that Margaret had established a standard that would be virtually impossible to match. The combination of speed and accuracy she had displayed represented the kind of skill development that took years to achieve, and her calm demeanor under pressure suggested a level of mental discipline that went far beyond recreational shooting. Third and final round was still to come, the challenge round that Bob Hendricks had designed to test composure and adaptability under the most difficult conditions. But already, Margaret had fundamentally altered the dynamic of the competition and her colleagues' perception of who she really was beneath her quiet, professional exterior. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the final participants completed their rapid-fire sequences, the atmosphere at the shooting range had transformed from casual corporate team building to something approaching genuine athletic competition. Margaret's dominant performance in both previous rounds had created a palpable tension among her colleagues, dividing them into two distinct camps: those who were genuinely impressed by her unexpected skill, and those who seemed almost offended by her success. Bob Hendricks gathered the remaining competitors for the final challenge round, his weathered face bearing the expression of someone who had witnessed something unusual. In his decades of running corporate shooting events, he had developed a keen eye for identifying the difference between lucky shots and genuine marksmanship. What he had observed from Margaret went far beyond anything he typically saw from office workers trying their hand at recreational shooting. "The final round," he announced to the assembled group, "is designed to test your ability to perform under changing conditions and pressure. You'll face a series of different shooting scenarios, each with its own unique challenges. This isn't just about accuracy, it's about adaptability, problem solving, and maintaining your composure when things don't go according to plan." The challenge round consisted of 5 distinct shooting problems, each designed to test different aspects of marksmanship skill. The first station required shooting while standing unsupported at varying distances. The second involved engaging targets from behind cover while maintaining accuracy. The third tested precision shooting at small targets under artificial time pressure. The fourth required shooting from awkward positions that challenged traditional stance and grip techniques. The final station combined multiple elements in a complex scenario that would push even experienced shooters to their limits. James Morrison III, despite his declining confidence, insisted on maintaining his position as the first shooter. His performance in the challenge round reflected the psychological pressure that Margaret's excellence had created. Where he had once shot with smooth confidence, he now second-guessed his decisions and rushed his shots in an apparent attempt to match her speed and precision. The result was a series of inconsistent performances that highlighted the difference between casual competence and genuine expertise. His total score across all 5 challenge stations was respectable but unremarkable, the kind of performance that would have been impressive in a normal corporate competition but seemed inadequate in the shadow of Margaret's continued excellence. As he stepped away from the final station, his frustration was evident in his body language and the tight set of his jaw. The other participants followed with varying degrees of success, but none managed to establish themselves as serious contenders for the overall victory. The challenge round was proving to be exactly what Bob Hendricks had intended: a comprehensive test that separated those with basic shooting skills from those with the training and mental discipline necessary for consistent performance under difficult conditions. When Margaret's turn came for the challenge round, she approached each station with the same methodical preparation that had characterized her entire performance. But for those watching closely, there were subtle signs that she understood exactly what was being asked of her at each stage. Her equipment adjustments were precise and purposeful. Her stance modifications showed deep understanding of shooting fundamentals, and her approach to each problem demonstrated tactical thinking that went far beyond amateur-level knowledge. At the first station, shooting while standing unsupported, Margaret demonstrated the kind of natural stability that Elena Vasquez had recognized during their very first training session. Her shots grouped tightly despite the challenging position, each bullet finding its mark with the consistency that marked genuinely skilled marksmanship. The second station, engaging targets from behind cover, revealed another dimension of Margaret's training. Her movement between shooting positions was fluid and efficient, suggesting familiarity with tactical shooting concepts that most recreational shooters never encountered. She understood how to use cover effectively while maintaining clear sightlines to her targets, and her shots came with the kind of controlled aggression that spoke to extensive practice in dynamic shooting scenarios. At the precision station, Where small targets challenged even experienced marksmen, Margaret's performance bordered on the extraordinary. Under artificial time pressure designed to rattle shooters and force hurried shots, she maintained the same careful sight alignment and trigger control that had defined her shooting throughout the day. Her bullets found their marks with mechanical consistency, earning maximum points at a station where most participants struggled to achieve passing scores. The fourth station tested shooting from awkward positions, kneeling, prone, and supported positions that challenged traditional stance and grip techniques. Margaret adapted to each position with the fluid competence of someone who had practiced these scenarios extensively. Her body mechanics adjusted automatically to accommodate the different shooting positions, and her accuracy remained virtually unchanged despite the challenging conditions. As Margaret approached the final station, the most complex scenario that combined multiple shooting challenges into a single comprehensive test, the entire range had fallen into expectant silence. Even the employees who had been participating in other lodge activities had gathered to watch what had become far more than a simple corporate team-building exercise. The final station required Margaret to engage multiple targets at different distances from different positions under time pressure, while managing equipment transitions and target prioritization. It was the kind of comprehensive challenge that could overwhelm even experienced competitive shooters, designed to test every aspect of marksmanship skill. Simultaneously, Margaret surveyed the station with the calm, analytical approach she brought to complex business problems. She could see the solution in her mind, the sequence of shots, the transitions between positions, the timing that would allow her to complete the challenge while maintaining the accuracy standards she had set for herself throughout the competition. Elena Vasquez had prepared her for scenarios exactly like this one. Complex shooting problems, her coach had explained, are just simple shooting problems combined together. Break them down into their component parts, execute each part perfectly, and the complex becomes simple. As Margaret assumed her starting position for the final challenge, she could sense the weight of expectation from everyone watching. This was her moment to either confirm the extraordinary skill she had demonstrated throughout the day or to falter. Under the pressure of the most demanding test the competition could offer, Margaret took a deep breath and began the final challenge sequence with the same methodical precision that had defined her performance throughout the entire competition. The complex scenario unfolded before her like a tactical puzzle that needed to be solved through perfect execution rather than rushed aggression. And her years of training with Elena Vasquez had prepared her for exactly this type of comprehensive test. The first phase required her to engage 3 targets at different distances while transitioning between standing and kneeling positions. Margaret's movements were fluid and purposeful as she dropped into the kneeling position, her body automatically assuming the stable shooting platform that Elena had drilled into her during countless practice sessions. Her first shot rang out, clean and true, followed immediately by a smooth transition to the second target. Bob Hendricks watched through his spotting scope with growing amazement as Margaret worked through the complex sequence. Each shot was fired with deliberate precision. Each movement between positions was economical and efficient, and her target prioritization showed tactical thinking that he rarely saw even among experienced competitive shooters. This wasn't just good marksmanship, it was exceptional shooting, executed under pressure by someone who clearly understood the underlying principles of advanced firearms training. The second phase of the challenge required Margaret to engage targets from behind cover while managing ammunition changes and maintaining accuracy under artificial time pressure. She moved behind the barricade with practiced confidence, using the cover effectively while maintaining clear sight lines to her targets. Her shots came in controlled pairs, each bullet finding its mark with mechanical consistency, despite the challenging shooting position. "Where did you say she learned to shoot?" Bob asked one of the Morrison Associates executives who was standing nearby, his voice carrying a mixture of professional admiration and genuine curiosity. "She didn't say," came the reply. "She just said she practices on weekends." Bob nodded thoughtfully, but his experienced eye recognized training that went far beyond weekend recreational shooting. The level of skill Margaret was demonstrating suggested serious instruction, dedicated practice, and the kind of commitment that transformed casual interest into genuine expertise. Whatever her background, she was operating at a level that would be competitive in serious marksmanship competitions. The third phase tested Margaret's ability to engage small, precision targets while managing equipment transitions and time pressure simultaneously. She approached this challenge with the same analytical mindset she applied to complex business problems, breaking down the sequence into manageable components and executing each one with careful attention to detail. Her shots found their marks with mathematical precision, each bullet placement demonstrating not just accuracy but deep understanding of the ballistic and mechanical principles that governed precision shooting. The small targets that had challenged other participants seemed to pose no special difficulty for Margaret, who engaged them with the same confidence she had shown throughout the entire competition. As Margaret entered the final phase of the challenge, the most complex portion that combined all previous elements into a single comprehensive test, the gathered crowd of her colleagues had grown completely silent. Even James Morrison III, despite his obvious frustration at being so thoroughly outperformed, found himself watching with grudging fascination as the quiet secretary continued to redefine everyone's understanding of her capabilities. The final sequence required Margaret to engage multiple targets from multiple positions while managing time pressure, ammunition changes, and target prioritization under the most demanding conditions the range could offer. It was designed to overwhelm shooters and force mistakes through complexity and pressure, but Margaret approached it with the same calm competence that characterized every aspect of her professional life. She moved through the sequence like a chess master executing a carefully planned strategy, each action purposeful and precise. Her shots came with rhythmic consistency, her transitions between positions were smooth and efficient, and her target engagement showed the kind of tactical awareness that spoke to extensive training in advanced shooting disciplines. When the timer finally stopped and Margaret lowered her weapon, the silence that followed was profound and meaningful. Bob Hendricks raised his binoculars to assess the targets, already knowing from what he had observed that Margaret's performance would be exceptional, but still amazed by the level of precision he was documenting. "Perfect," he announced after completing his evaluation of all 5 challenge stations. "Perfect score across all phases of the challenge round. I've never seen anything like it in a corporate competition." The reaction from Margaret's colleagues was immediate and varied. Some burst into spontaneous applause, genuinely impressed by the extraordinary display of skill they had witnessed. Others seemed stunned into silence, still processing the fact that the quiet secretary they had worked with for years had just delivered a shooting performance that would be difficult for professional marksmen to match. James Morrison III stood, with his arms crossed, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and the dawning realization that his assumptions about gender, job titles, and shooting ability had been completely and publicly shattered. The hunting stories and equipment discussions that had seemed so impressive that morning now felt hollow and embarrassing in the face of Margaret's quiet competence. Patricia from marketing approached Margaret with an expression that mixed admiration with barely concealed embarrassment. "Margaret, that was incredible. I had no idea you could shoot like that. Where on earth did you learn?" Margaret's response was characteristically modest and revealing nothing of the intensive training regime that had produced her exceptional skills. "I just practice when I can," she said simply, beginning to pack her equipment with the same quiet efficiency she brought to her office work. But Bob Hendricks wasn't satisfied with such a dismissive answer. His professional experience told him that what he had just witnessed represented years of dedicated training under expert instruction. "Ma'am," he said respectfully. "I've been running shooting competitions for over 20 years, and I've worked with Olympic-level marksmen and military special operations personnel. What you just demonstrated isn't weekend practice. That's world-class marksmanship. Whoever trained you did an exceptional job." Margaret looked up from her equipment bag, and for just a moment, her carefully maintained professional mask slipped, enough to reveal a hint of the passion that drove her weekend pursuits. "My instructor would be pleased to hear that," she said quietly, the first direct acknowledgement she had made of the serious training that lay behind her. Performance. As the competition officially concluded and participants began to disperse, the conversations that buzzed through the lodge centered on a single topic: the quiet secretary who had just redefined everyone's understanding of hidden talents and personal capabilities. Margaret had not just won a corporate shooting competition, she had delivered a performance so exceptional that it would become the stuff of company legend, discussed and retold for years to come. The implications of what had happened at Pine Ridge Lodge extended far beyond a simple team-building exercise. Margaret had proven that assumptions based on job titles, gender, and quiet demeanor could be not just wrong, but spectacularly, publicly wrong. Her perfect shooting had silenced not just her critics, but every person who had ever underestimated someone based on their position in a corporate hierarchy or their reluctance to boast about their capabilities. As the sun began to set behind the mountain peaks and the lodge prepared for the evening's awards ceremony, Margaret Chen quietly cleaned her equipment and prepared to return to her role as the unassuming secretary, who took notes in meetings and scheduled appointments for executives. But everyone who had witnessed her performance knew that they would never look at her, or anyone else, quite the same way again. The evening air at Pine Ridge Lodge carried a different energy as employees gathered in the main hall for dinner and the awards ceremony. The casual chatter that had characterized the morning had been replaced by more intense conversations, most of which centered around Margaret's extraordinary shooting performance and the implications of what everyone had witnessed. The corporate hierarchy that had seemed so fixed and permanent that morning suddenly felt more fluid, as people grappled with the realization that they had fundamentally misjudged one of their colleagues. Margaret sat at a small table near the back of the dining room, maintaining the same low profile she had cultivated throughout her 8 years at Morrison Associates. But despite her efforts to remain inconspicuous, she found herself the center of attention in a way that was both uncomfortable and oddly satisfying. Colleagues who had barely acknowledged her existence that morning were now approaching her table with congratulations, questions, and thinly veiled attempts to understand how the quiet secretary had developed such extraordinary skills. "Margaret, that was absolutely incredible today," said David from the legal department, his voice carrying genuine admiration. "I've been hunting since I was a kid, and I've never seen shooting like that outside of professional competitions. How long have you been practicing?" Margaret's response remained characteristically modest. "A few years," she said simply, offering no details about Elena Vasquez, the Olympic-level coaching, or the passion that had driven her to pursue excellence in a field completely separate from her professional life. She had no intention of turning her private sanctuary into office gossip or corporate politics, but her discretion only seemed to fuel more speculation and curiosity. Jennifer from sales had spent the afternoon trying to piece together clues about Margaret's background, searching for some explanation that would make sense of what she had witnessed. "Do you have military experience?" she asked directly. "Or maybe family members who taught you to shoot?" Margaret shook her head politely. "No military background. I just found I enjoyed it, so I kept practicing." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of James Morrison III, who approached Margaret's table with an expression that seemed to cycle between forced congeniality and barely suppressed frustration. His confident demeanor from that morning had been replaced by something more complex, a mixture of wounded pride, confusion, and the dawning realization that his assumptions about gender, job titles, and shooting ability had been publicly and thoroughly demolished. "Margaret," he said, his voice carrying a strained quality that suggested internal struggle, "I owe you an apology for my comments this morning. I was mistaken about your capabilities." It was perhaps the closest thing to genuine contrition that James Morrison III had ever offered to a subordinate, but his tone suggested that the words were being forced out by social necessity rather than genuine remorse. Margaret accepted the apology with the same professional grace she brought to every aspect of her corporate interactions, but those watching closely could see that she wasn't entirely convinced of its sincerity. "Thank you," she replied simply. "We all have hidden talents, I suppose." The comment carried just enough subtle emphasis to remind everyone present that assumptions and prejudices could be dangerous things, particularly when they led to underestimating people based on superficial characteristics like job titles or quiet demeanor. As dinner concluded and Bob Hendricks prepared to announce the competition results, the atmosphere in the dining room had taken on the quality of a significant corporate moment. Everyone present understood that they had witnessed something unusual, something that would be discussed and remembered long after the retreat ended and normal office routines resumed. Bob stepped to the front of the room, carrying a clipboard with the official results, his weathered face bearing an expression of professional satisfaction mixed with genuine amazement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "in my 20 years of running corporate shooting competitions, I've seen a lot of impressive performances. But what happened today at our range was truly exceptional." He paused to scan the room, his eyes lingering briefly on Margaret before continuing. "The winner of today's shooting competition with a perfect score in precision shooting, the highest rapid-fire score I've recorded in a corporate event, and a flawless performance in the challenge round, is Margaret Chen." The applause that followed was immediate and sustained, but it carried different meanings for different people in the room. Some colleagues clapped with genuine enthusiasm, impressed by Margaret's skill and pleased to see excellence recognized, regardless of corporate hierarchy. Others applauded more politely, still processing the implications of what they had witnessed and what it meant for their own assumptions about their coworkers. Margaret stood to accept the recognition with the same quiet dignity that characterized every aspect of her professional life, but there was something different in her posture, a subtle confidence that hadn't been visible that morning. She had proven something important to herself and to everyone who had dismissed her capabilities, and the satisfaction of that accomplishment was evident to anyone who bothered to look closely. "This kind of marksmanship," Bob continued, "represents years of dedicated training and practice. Margaret, whoever taught you did an exceptional job, and your performance today would be competitive in serious marksmanship competitions. You should be very proud of what you've accomplished." The comment drew nods of agreement from around the room, but it also intensified the speculation about Margaret's background and training. Her colleagues were beginning to understand that there were aspects of her life they knew nothing about, skills and passions that existed completely outside the corporate environment, where they had always encountered her. As the ceremony concluded, and people began to drift toward the lodge's bar and common areas, Margaret found herself in the unusual position of being the center of positive attention. Colleagues who had barely spoken to her in 8 years were now eager to engage her in conversation, ask about her hobbies, and treat her with a level of respect that had been notably absent from their previous interactions. But perhaps the most telling moment came when Patricia from marketing, who had been one of James Morrison III's most vocal supporters that morning, approached Margaret with an expression of genuine respect. "I owe you an apology too," she said quietly. "I made assumptions about you that were completely wrong, and I'm embarrassed by some of the things I said earlier. Your performance today was inspiring, and it's made me think about how we sometimes judge people without really knowing them." Margaret accepted the apology graciously, but the significance of the moment extended beyond personal vindication. She had proven that excellence could emerge from unexpected places, that quiet competence could be more valuable than loud boasting, and that assumptions based on job titles and corporate hierarchies could be not just wrong, but spectacularly, publicly wrong. The conversation in the lodge's comfortable common room continued well into the evening, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted from the casual corporate socializing that had characterized the morning. Margaret found herself at the center of discussions that ranged from genuine curiosity about her shooting background to broader conversations about hidden talents and the dangers of making assumptions about colleagues based on their professional roles. Dr. Sarah Williams, the company's chief technology officer and one of the few executives who had always treated Margaret with professional respect, approached her with a knowing smile. "Margaret, I have to ask, when James made those comments this morning about shooting not being a secretary kind of activity, did you already know you were going to prove him wrong so spectacularly?" Margaret considered the question carefully, sipping her coffee while she formulated her response. "I knew I had trained for this kind of competition," she said finally. "But I also knew that people see what they expect to see. Sometimes it's better to let your actions speak for themselves." The comment revealed a level of strategic thinking that went beyond simple modesty. Margaret had understood the psychology of the situation from the beginning, recognizing that her colleagues' prejudices and assumptions would make her eventual success even more impactful. She had chosen to remain silent not because she lacked confidence, but because she understood the power of surprise and the importance of controlling the narrative through performance rather than words. Elena Vasquez had taught her more than just shooting technique during their 5 years of training together. The former Olympic markswoman had also shared lessons about competition psychology, the importance of mental preparation, and the strategic value of being underestimated by opponents who focused more on appearance than ability. "Never let them see you coming," Elena had told her during one of their early sessions. "Confidence is important, but quiet confidence is often more powerful than loud boasting. Let your shooting do the talking, and save the words for after you've proven your point." Those lessons had served Margaret well during the corporate competition, but they had also shaped her approach to professional life in ways that her colleagues were only beginning to understand. Her quiet competence in the office wasn't a sign of limitation or lack of ambition. It was a strategic choice made by someone who understood that sustained excellence was often more valuable than momentary recognition. Bob Hendricks joined the conversation, drawn by his continued fascination with Margaret's exceptional performance. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind me asking, but have you ever considered competitive shooting? Your skill level would be competitive in national-level marksmanship competitions, and your mental composure under pressure is exactly what separates good shooters from great ones." The suggestion prompted murmurs of agreement from the colleagues who had witnessed her performance. But Margaret's response revealed the complex relationship between her weekend passion and her professional life. "I shoot for personal satisfaction," she explained. "It helps me maintain focus and discipline that carries over into other areas of my life. The competition aspect isn't really what drives me." Her answer provided insight into the philosophical approach that had made her such an exceptional marksman. Unlike many competitive shooters who were motivated primarily by the desire to defeat opponents, Margaret's pursuit of shooting excellence was internally driven. She competed against her own standards rather than focusing on external validation, which had produced the kind of consistent performance that impressed experienced instructors like Bob Hendricks. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Thomas Morrison Sr., the company founder and James Morrison III's father, who had driven up from the city to join the retreat's concluding activities. His presence immediately shifted the dynamic in the room, as employees adjusted their posture and conversation topics in deference to the company's ultimate authority figure. But Thomas Morrison Sr. had already heard about the day's competition. Results from Bob Hendricks, and his first order of business was seeking out Margaret to congratulate her personally. His approach to her table drew the attention of everyone in the room, as colleagues watched to see how the company founder would react to his son's very public defeat by a secretary. "Miss Chen," he said formally, extending his hand in greeting. "Bob Hendricks tells me that your shooting performance today was exceptional. Perfect scores across multiple disciplines are remarkable achievements that speak to serious training and dedication." Margaret stood to shake his hand, maintaining the same professional demeanor she brought to their infrequent office interactions. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. It was a well-organized competition." Thomas Morrison Sr. studied her with the analytical eye that had built Morrison Associates into a successful firm over 3 decades. "Bob also tells me that your skill level would be competitive in professional marksmanship competitions. That kind of excellence doesn't develop by accident. It requires commitment, discipline, and probably significant investment in proper training and equipment." The observation was astute and revealed why Thomas Morrison Sr. had succeeded in business, where others had failed. He understood that exceptional performance in any field required resources, dedication, and usually expert guidance. Margaret's shooting ability suggested qualities that might be valuable in contexts beyond recreational competition. "I found that the discipline required for precision shooting has applications in other areas," Margaret replied carefully, recognizing that this conversation could have implications for her professional life that extended far beyond the corporate retreat. Thomas Morrison Sr. nodded thoughtfully. "I imagine it does. Focus, attention to detail, grace under pressure, and the ability to perform consistently when it matters, those are valuable qualities in any profession." The comment hung in the air with obvious implications, as everyone present understood that the company founder was drawing connections between Margaret's shooting excellence and her potential value as an employee. Her perfect performance had not only vindicated her against her critics, it had also demonstrated capabilities that might warrant reconsidering her role within the corporate structure. James Morrison III watched this exchange from across the room with an expression that mixed embarrassment, frustration, and growing concern about the implications of the day's events for his own position within the company hierarchy. His confident dismissal of Margaret's capabilities that morning had backfired spectacularly, and now his father was publicly recognizing qualities in her that he had completely failed to identify or appreciate. The implications of Thomas Morrison Sr.'s comments became clearer as the evening progressed, and informal conversations revealed the depth of his interest in Margaret's demonstrated capabilities. Unlike his son, who had focused on surface-level assumptions about gender and job titles, the company founder was drawing connections between the discipline required for exceptional marksmanship and the qualities that drove business success. "Margaret," he said, settling into a chair near her table, "I'd like to understand more about how you develop these skills. The level of precision shooting you demonstrated today suggests years of dedicated training, probably under professional instruction. That kind of commitment speaks to qualities that I value in any employee." Margaret recognized that this conversation had moved beyond polite congratulations into something that could affect her professional future. Thomas Morrison Sr. was known for his ability to identify talent and potential in unexpected places, and his question suggested genuine interest in understanding the person behind the performance he had heard about. "I began shooting about 5 years ago," she explained carefully. "I found that it required a type of focus and discipline that I enjoyed, so I pursued training to improve my skills. The mental aspects of marksmanship, concentration, breathing, control, managing pressure, seem to complement the attention to detail that my work requires." Thomas Morrison Sr. nodded approvingly. "And your instructor? Professional background?" Margaret hesitated briefly, knowing that revealing Elena Vasquez's Olympic credentials would make her own shooting abilities seem even more significant. "My instructor competed internationally," she said simply. She emphasized that shooting excellence requires the same systematic approach as any other complex skill, proper fundamentals, consistent practice, and continuous improvement. The answer revealed more than Margaret might have intended. Training under an Olympic-level instructor suggested serious commitment and significant investment in developing her capabilities. It also explained the exceptional skill level that had impressed Bob Hendricks and everyone else who had witnessed her performance. International competition, Thomas Morrison Sr. repeated thoughtfully. That's serious instruction. Your performance today makes much more sense in that context. He paused, studying Margaret with the same analytical attention he brought to important business decisions. Tell me, do you find that the mental discipline required for precision shooting translates to other challenging situations? The question was leading somewhere specific, and Margaret could sense that her answer might influence opportunities that extended far beyond the corporate retreat. Yes, she replied honestly. The ability to maintain focus under pressure, to execute complex tasks systematically, and to perform consistently when the stakes are high, those skills definitely have broader applications. Thomas Morrison Sr. smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had identified valuable capabilities that others had overlooked. I suspect they do. Bob Hendricks mentioned that your composure during the timed sequences was exceptional. That kind of grace under pressure is exactly what we need for client presentations, crisis management, and high-stakes negotiations. The conversation had taken a turn that surprised everyone within earshot, including James Morrison III, who was watching from across the room with growing alarm. His father was clearly drawing connections between Margaret's shooting excellence and her potential value in higher level corporate roles, exactly the kind of recognition that James had assumed would never be extended to someone in Margaret's position. Dr. Sarah Williams, who had been listening to the exchange with obvious interest, decided to contribute her own observations. Thomas, if I may add something, Margaret's work on complex projects has always impressed me. She handles detailed analysis and multi-stage problem-solving with exactly the kind of systematic approach she's describing. I've often thought her capabilities were underutilized in her current role. The comment from the company's chief technology officer carried significant weight, particularly coming from someone known for her analytical rigor and reluctance to offer praise without substance. Thomas Morrison Sr. turned his attention to Dr. Williams with obvious interest. Underutilized how? He asked directly. Dr. Williams glanced at Margaret before responding, recognizing that her answer could have significant implications for her colleague's career. Margaret consistently demonstrates strategic thinking, attention to detail, and the ability to manage complex projects under pressure. When I've worked with her on technical reports and presentations, her contributions have been substantive and insightful, not just administrative. Margaret felt a flush of gratitude toward Dr. Williams, who was providing professional validation that extended far beyond the day's shooting competition. But she also recognized that the conversation was moving into territory that could fundamentally change her role within the company, assuming Thomas Morrison Sr. was serious about the implications he seemed to be drawing. Margaret, Thomas Morrison Sr. said, turning his attention back to her, would you be interested in taking on projects that better utilize your analytical capabilities? We have several client initiatives that require exactly the kind of systematic thinking and grace under pressure that you've demonstrated. The offer was unexpected and significant, representing the kind of career opportunity that Margaret had assumed would never be available to someone in her position. Her years of quiet competence had finally been recognized, but it had taken her shooting excellence to open the door to broader professional recognition. I would be very interested, she replied carefully, maintaining her characteristic professionalism while internally processing the magnitude of what was being offered. James Morrison III approached the table at that moment, his expression carefully controlled but his tension evident to anyone who bothered to look closely. Dad, I hope you're not making any hasty decisions based on a single afternoon's activities. Margaret is certainly a capable secretary, but management responsibilities require different skills entirely. The comment revealed James's continued inability to understand what his father was recognizing about Margaret's demonstrated capabilities. His focus on job titles and traditional hierarchies prevented him from seeing the connections between exceptional performance in one demanding discipline and potential excellence in others. Thomas Morrison Sr. studied his son with an expression that mixed disappointment with recognition that this was exactly the kind of narrow thinking that limited organizational effectiveness. James, what I witnessed today wasn't just good shooting, it was exceptional performance under pressure, systematic problem solving, and the kind of mental discipline that translates directly to business success. Those are exactly the skills we need for management responsibilities. The rebuke was gentle but unmistakable, and it highlighted the fundamental difference between father and son in their ability to recognize talent and potential in unexpected places. The tension in the room became palpable as the implications of Thomas Morrison Sr.'s comments settled over the gathered employees. What had begun as a casual corporate retreat was transforming into a moment that would reshape professional relationships and career trajectories within Morrison Associates. Margaret found herself at the center of a conversation that extended far beyond shooting competitions into questions of recognition, opportunity, and the often arbitrary nature of corporate hierarchies. James Morrison III's discomfort was evident as he struggled to process his father's obvious interest in promoting Margaret to a more significant role within the company. His confident dismissal of her capabilities that morning had not only been proven wrong, it had also revealed limitations in his own judgment that his father was clearly noting with concern. "Dad," James said, attempting to regain control of the conversation, "I think we should discuss personnel decisions privately, rather than in front of the entire team. There are protocols and considerations that, the protocols," Thomas Morrison Sr. interrupted firmly, "are designed to identify and promote talented individuals who can contribute to our success. What I've observed today suggests that our current protocols may have failed to recognize capabilities that have been right in front of us for years." The rebuke was delivered in the measured tone that Thomas Morrison Sr. used for important business discussions, but its implications were unmistakable. He was questioning not just his son's judgment about Margaret's capabilities, but the broader systems and assumptions that had kept her in a limited role, despite evidence of her competence and potential. Margaret sat quietly through this exchange, recognizing that she had become the focal point of a larger conversation about corporate culture, gender bias, and the importance of looking beyond surface-level assumptions when evaluating employees. Her shooting performance had opened a door, but the real question was whether she was prepared to walk through it into a professional role that would bring new challenges and responsibilities. Dr. Sarah Williams, sensing the complexity of the moment, offered her own perspective. "Thomas, I've worked with Margaret on several technical projects over the years, and I can confirm that her analytical capabilities and attention to detail are exceptional. Her shooting performance today demonstrates the same qualities that make her valuable in complex business situations: systematic thinking, composure under pressure, and consistent execution." The endorsement from the company's chief technology officer carried significant weight, particularly given Dr. Williams's reputation for analytical rigor and her reluctance to offer praise without substance. Thomas Morrison Sr. nodded approvingly, recognizing that he was receiving confirmation of his instincts about Margaret's potential from someone whose judgment he valued. "Margaret," he said, turning his attention back to her, "I'd like to schedule a formal conversation next week about expanding your role within the company. Your demonstrated capabilities suggest that you could make significant contributions to our strategic planning and client relationship management. Would you be interested in exploring those opportunities?" The offer represented exactly the kind of career advancement that Margaret had dreamed about, but never expected to receive. Her years of quiet competence had finally been recognized, but it had taken her shooting excellence to open the door to broader professional opportunities. She understood that accepting the offer would fundamentally change her relationship with her colleagues and her role within the company's hierarchy. "Yes," she replied simply, her voice carrying the same quiet confidence that had characterized her shooting performance. "I would be very interested in discussing those opportunities." Thomas Morrison Sr. smiled with satisfaction, recognizing that he had identified valuable capabilities that had been underutilized for years. "Excellent. I'll have my assistant schedule something for early next week. In the meantime, I want you to know that your performance today has been genuinely impressive, and not just the shooting. The composure, the systematic thinking, the ability to perform under pressure, those are exactly the qualities we need in leadership positions." The conversation concluded with handshakes and congratulations, but everyone present understood that they had witnessed a pivotal moment in Morrison Associates' corporate culture. Margaret's shooting excellence had not only vindicated her against those who had dismissed her capabilities, it had also demonstrated the importance of looking beyond job titles and surface-level assumptions when evaluating talent and potential. As the evening wound down and employees began to disperse to their rooms, Margaret found herself reflecting on the extraordinary events of the day. She had arrived at Pine Ridge Lodge as the invisible secretary, who took notes in meetings and scheduled appointments for executives. She was leaving as someone whose capabilities had been recognized, whose potential had been acknowledged, and whose quiet competence had finally received the professional validation it deserved. The shooting competition had been about more than marksmanship. It had been about proving that excellence could emerge from unexpected places, that assumptions based on gender and job titles could be spectacularly wrong, and that quiet competence was often more valuable than loud boasting. Margaret had silenced her critics not with words, but with 15 perfect shots that demonstrated capabilities none of them had bothered to recognize. Bob Hendricks approached her as she prepared to leave the common room, carrying a small trophy that would commemorate her exceptional performance. "Margaret," he said respectfully, "this is for you. But more importantly, I want you to know that what you demonstrated today was truly remarkable. Your instructor should be very proud, and you should be proud of yourself." Margaret accepted the trophy with genuine gratitude, but her satisfaction came from more than the recognition of her shooting skills. She had proven something important about the dangers of underestimating people based on their position in corporate hierarchies or their reluctance to boast about their capabilities. Her perfect performance had opened doors that had been closed for years, and it had demonstrated that assumptions about what people could accomplish were often more limiting than actual capabilities. As she made her way to her room, Margaret Chen was no longer invisible. She was a marksman of exceptional skill, a professional whose capabilities had finally been recognized, and a person who had proven that quiet competence could be more powerful than the loudest boasting. Tomorrow she would return to Morrison Associates as someone whose potential was finally understood and valued. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.